My name is Clara Whitmore, and I turned 63 the day the package arrived. I had baked myself a small chocolate cake, nothing fancy, just enough to mark the occasion. The single candle flickered in my kitchen, its flame reflected in the window as snow fell outside. I blew it out in silence, wishing only for peace. That was when the knock rattled the front door and changed everything. On the steps sat a square box, wrapped in cream paper with a ribbon tied too neatly, too perfectly. My heart stuttered when I read the handwriting on the card. It belonged to my son, Nathan. We hadn't spoken in 3 years, not since the night he stormed out of this house with accusations still ringing in my ears. Yet here it was, his gift, with a note clipped to the top. Happy birthday, Mom. Let's start over. I carried it inside, turning the box over in my hands, searching for clues that this was some mistake. The paper smelled faintly of lavender. His wife Elaine's touch. Inside, nestled in tissue, were cookies arranged in flawless rows, circles, stars, and hearts, each glazed to perfection. For a moment I felt a tug in my chest, the old longing that maybe he wanted to mend the broken bridge between us. But then the doubt crept in. Nathan had always needed control. Every corner of life measured and exact. Why now, after silence so sharp it nearly bled me dry? I placed one cookie into a small container and slid it into the back of my refrigerator, a strange instinct telling me to hold it aside. The rest I wrapped carefully and walked across the street to Margaret Holt, Elaine's mother. She had always greeted me kindly, even when the family rift deepened. Happy birthday, Clara. She smiled as I set the gift on her counter. I forced a smile back, pretending my hands weren't trembling. That night, I sat awake, staring at the empty ribbon. My son wanted to start over. But why did it feel more like a warning than a wish? The next morning, the ribbon from Nathan's package still lay on my kitchen table like a snake I was too wary to touch. I poured myself coffee, but even the warmth in my hands couldn't shake the unease crawling beneath my skin. Every detail of the gift returned to me. The neat folds in the paper, the symmetrical rows of cookies. Nathan's touch was all over it, the same obsession with precision he had shown since boyhood. I remembered him at 9 years old, lining up his crayons from lightest to darkest, furious if anyone disturbed the order. Back then I thought it was charming, the mark of a bright and focused child. But over time, that need for control hardened into something sharper. By high school, arguments about his grades, his clothes, even how the furniture should sit in our living room became constant battles. I used to laugh it off. Later, I realized I had been ignoring a warning, staring at that ribbon. I wondered if I was doing it again. Was this gift a peace offering or another move in a game I didn't fully understand? I wanted to believe in reconciliation, but his silence over the past 3 years had not been passive. It had been deliberate. He had walked away, leaving me to eat dinners alone, leaving his wife Elaine to soften his absence with strained visits. I carried my mug to the sink and glanced at the refrigerator door. The small container with that single cookie sat inside, waiting. My fingers brushed the handle, but I pulled back. Something in me whispered to wait. I tried to convince myself it was only caution, nothing more. But when the phone rang that afternoon, and his voice came through the line, tight and urgent, the unease hardened into dread. Did you try them yet, Mom? Nathan's voice carried no warmth, only a clipped urgency that tightened my grip on the receiver. I swallowed hard. Not yet, I said, forcing my tone into something light. I thought I'd save them for later. A pause, too long. Stretched across the line. Then he asked, Where are they now? His words were low, deliberate, like each one had been measured before it left his mouth. I hesitated. The truth slipped out before I could stop it. I gave them to Margaret. She loves sweets, and she was kind enough to stop by yesterday. The silence on the other end prickled against my ear. When he finally spoke, his voice had shifted, brittle and sharp. You gave them away? Yes, I answered quietly, already regretting it. He exhaled, a sound that was almost a laugh, but not quite. Interesting, he said, and then the line went dead. I stared at the phone in my hand, my pulse quickening. The air in the kitchen felt heavier, as though his voice had left behind a residue I couldn't wipe away. For a long moment, I tried to convince myself I was reading too much into it. Maybe he was only hurt that I hadn't eaten the gift. Maybe that was all. But deep down, I knew better. Nathan had always been careful with words, deliberate in the way he wielded them. His reaction hadn't been disappointment. It had been something darker, something I couldn't yet name. I sat there until the dusk crept in through the curtains, the unease growing thicker by the hour. And when the phone rang again later that evening, this time with Elaine's trembling voice on the line, I understood why. Margaret had been rushed to the hospital. Elaine's words tumbled through the receiver, sharp and frantic. Clara, it's Margaret. She collapsed after dinner. She's in the ER now. They think it's food poisoning, but she's so confused. She barely knows where she is. My breath caught, the walls of the kitchen seeming to tilt. I pressed the phone tighter against my ear. Will she be all right? They don't know yet, Elaine whispered, her voice breaking. In the background, I heard the chaos of a hospital, intercoms buzzing, hurried footsteps, the distant rattle of a gurney. They're running tests. I'm scared. I promised I'd come as soon as I could, but after we hung up, my legs felt rooted to the floor. My eyes darted to the trash can, half filled from yesterday's celebration. Something gnawed at me, an instinct so strong I could no longer ignore it. With shaking hands, I pulled the bag free and began rifling through paper towels and coffee grounds until I found it. A small plastic vial, clear but smudged, no label, a trace of fine white powder clinging to its edges. I froze, staring at it as though it might leap from my fingers. My heart thudded, each beat heavier than the last. It didn't belong to me. I hadn't bought it, which meant it came with the cookies. Setting the vial on the counter, I felt the room grow colder. The ribbon from the package lay still on the table, an echo of a birthday that now seemed sinister. I opened the refrigerator and looked at the single cookie I had tucked away, the one I had saved without knowing why. My reflection stared back from the glass, pale and shaken. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark with the vial and the cookie beside me, waiting for dawn to bring either clarity or confirmation of the dread that had settled into my bones. The morning light crept across my kitchen table, glinting off the small vial as though daring me to look closer. My hands ached from clenching them through the night. I couldn't wait any longer. If Margaret's collapse was connected to those cookies, I needed to know the truth. I thought of the one person I could trust with something like this, Susan Miller. We had been friends since nursing school, though Susan had gone on to earn her doctorate in toxicology and now worked at the university hospital's lab. She was steady, methodical, and above all, discreet. When I called, she heard the strain in my voice and told me to come right away. I wrapped the cookie in foil, sealed it in a plastic container, and tucked the vial into a small evidence bag I found in the drawer from my old nursing days. My heart pounded as I drove the 20 miles into the city, rehearsing what I would say. Susan met me at the side entrance, her brow furrowing as I held out the package. "Clara, what on earth is this?" "My son sent me cookies," I whispered, my throat tight. "Margaret ate them. She's in the hospital now. I found this with the box." I handed her the vial. She didn't flinch, only gave a short nod. "I'll run a preliminary test, but if this is what I think it might be, you'll need to go to the police. Chain of custody matters. Clara." I sat in her office while she worked, every tick of the clock loud as a hammer. After what felt like hours, she returned, her expression grave. "There are traces of aconitine in that cookie, the active toxin from monkshood. It's lethal. Clara, you did the right thing not to eat it." Her words left me cold. My son's gift had not been an olive branch. It had been a weapon. I left Susan's office with my knees trembling, the container sealed in a proper evidence bag now. She had urged me to go straight to the authorities, and though my heart resisted the thought of exposing my own son, I knew I couldn't ignore the weight of her warning. If Nathan was capable of this, silence would only invite more danger. At the police station, the fluorescent lights hummed above me as I explained everything to the desk officer. He listened, his eyes sharpening as I placed the cookie and vial on the counter. Within minutes, I was escorted to a quiet room where Detective Alan Reyes introduced himself. He had the kind of presence that made you sit straighter, not unkind, but firm in a way that demanded truth. "You've done the right thing bringing this here," he said, after hearing my story. "But to move forward, we need to establish a clear chain of custody. That means everything you've brought will be logged, sealed, and tested under our supervision." I nodded, my voice catching as I agreed, watching him label the evidence bags. I felt the final thread of denial slip away. This wasn't paranoia or a mother's imagination. It was real. Detective Reyes leaned forward. "If your son meant harm, we'll find out. But we'll need more than this. Something direct, something that ties him to intent." His words settled into me like a stone. I had thought handing over the cookie would be the end of it, that the police would take control. Instead, I realized the burden wasn't lifted. It was only beginning. When I walked back out into the winter air, snowflakes drifting onto my coat, I felt both lighter and heavier. I had taken the first step toward justice, but it meant walking straight into the storm my son had created. The next evening, Detective Reyes called me back to the station. His tone was steady but left no room for doubt. "Mrs. Whitmore, if we're going to build a case, we need something more concrete, something from your son himself. Without it, all we have is circumstantial evidence." The thought chilled me. Recording Nathan, confronting him, stepping into his home. It all felt like trespassing into a world I no longer belonged to, and yet, a part of me knew I was the only one who could do it. Who else would he speak to with that unguarded arrogance? Reyes slid a small device across the desk, a voice recorder no bigger than a matchbox. "This state requires only one party's consent. That means you can legally record as long as you're part of the conversation. If he says anything that shows intent, we'll have what we need." I sat there, staring at the device, my fingers trembling as I picked it up. "And if he realizes what I'm doing," I asked softly, "then you walk away. Don't push, don't risk yourself. Just give him room to reveal himself." Full that night, I stood at my front door, coat buttoned, recorder tucked into my pocket. The street was quiet, the kind of stillness that makes every sound sharper. My heart thudded as I crossed to Nathan's house, each step heavier than the last. Elaine greeted me with a wary smile, surprise flickering in her eyes. Nathan appeared behind her, his expression unreadable, though his jaw tightened the moment he saw me. "I thought maybe we could talk," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside. He studied me for a long moment before stepping aside. "Then come in, Mom," he murmured. And just like that, I walked into the lion's den. Nathan's living room was exactly as I remembered, tidy to the point of sterility, every book spine aligned, every picture frame squared with military precision. I sat on the edge of the sofa while he poured himself a drink, his eyes never quite meeting mine. "So," he said at last, swirling the amber liquid, "did you enjoy the cookies?" I forced a smile. "I shared them, actually. Margaret adored the star-shaped one. Said it tasted different from the rest." His hand paused midair. For just a second, his composure cracked, a flicker of something sharp crossing his face before he masked it with a sip. "Did she now?" he said softly. The recorder in my pocket hummed against my ribs like a secret heartbeat. I leaned forward, choosing my words with care. "You always were precise, Nathan. You never left anything to chance. I knew those cookies had your touch. I could almost taste the effort in every bite." He chuckled, but it was hollow. "Perfection requires sacrifice. Mom, you of all people should know that." My breath caught, but I kept my voice calm. "And what kind of sacrifice would that be?" His gaze met mine then, sharp and cold, the kind that separates those who deserve to thrive from those who don't. A shiver ran through me, but I stayed still, nodding as though I understood. Inside, my pulse pounded so loud I feared it would drown the recorder. The conversation drifted after that, Nathan retreating into small talk, but the damage was done. I had what Reyes needed. His own words, his own pride betraying him. When I finally stood to leave, he kissed my cheek. His lips were cool, his smile thin. "Next time, Mom," he whispered, "try one yourself." The night air hit me like a rush of ice as I stepped off Nathan's porch. My hands shook as I clutched my coat tighter, the recorder burning against my side. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to put as much distance as possible between myself and the house that no longer felt like my son's, but like a trap. At the station the next morning, Detective Reyes listened to the recording with his jaw tight, his eyes flicking to mine at every incriminating word. When it ended, he exhaled slowly. "This is enough for probable cause," he said. "Combined with the toxicology report, we can get a warrant." Hearing those words brought no relief. My stomach knotted as I imagined Nathan in handcuffs, the boy I once rocked to sleep reduced to a suspect file. And yet, when Reyes placed a reassuring hand on the table, I knew there was no other way. 2 days later, they searched his office. Elaine sat in the corner of the living room when I arrived, pale and hollow-eyed. She didn't even flinch when the officers carried out boxes of notebooks and vials. "He's been at this for months," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Writing, experimenting. I thought it was just his hobby, something eccentric. I didn't want to see what it really was." Among the seized items was a worn leather journal filled with formulas and notes about monkshood extractions, dosages, side effects. Pages of calculations scrawled in Nathan's tight handwriting told the story of a man obsessed. As I watched them load the evidence into a van, I felt a strange mixture of grief and grim clarity. Whatever part of Nathan had been my son was buried under this, his hunger for control, his belief in sacrifice, and now, at last, the truth stood in daylight. Margaret survived, though the recovery was slow, weeks after her collapse. I visit her at the rehabilitation wing, where sunlight poured through tall windows and settled on her quilt. She looked fragile, her voice soft, but her eyes warmed when she saw me. "You saved me, Clara," she whispered, gripping my hand. "If you hadn't trusted your instincts." Her words trailed off, but the meaning lingered between us. I smiled faintly, though guilt pressed heavy on my chest. Saving her had meant condemning Nathan, no matter how justified. It was a truth that scraped against every maternal bone in me. Elaine sat beside her mother during those visits, quieter than I'd ever seen her. One afternoon, she finally broke her silence. "I found his posts," she said, sliding her phone across the table. On the screen were threads from an anonymous forum, pages of Nathan's writings about toxic plants, meticulous instructions for extraction, discussions of thresholds between survival and death. "I should have said something sooner," she whispered, tears brimming. I kept telling myself he was eccentric, not dangerous. I was wrong. I placed a hand over hers. We both wanted to believe in the son and husband we loved. Sometimes, faith blinds us. Driving home, I felt the emptiness of my house more acutely than ever. No laughter, no footsteps, only the echo of what had been. I joined a small support group at the church, women my age who carried wounds invisible to others. Sitting in that circle, I spoke the words aloud for the first time. "My son tried to kill me." The silence that followed was not judgment, but understanding. It was in that quiet company that I began to learn something new. Survival was not the end of the story. Healing had to follow. Spring came slowly that year, the snow melting into rivulets that carved paths along the sidewalks. I spent more time in my garden, pulling weeds, turning soil, letting my hands find steadiness in the rhythm of small tasks. Life, I discovered, had its own way of returning, even when hearts lagged behind. One afternoon, I opened the fireproof box in my study. Inside lay the single cookie sealed in plastic, and the card Nathan had written, "Happy birthday. Mom, let's start over." The words felt almost mocking now, yet I kept them not as mementos of affection, but as reminders. They were proof of what instinct had whispered, and what courage had confirmed. Sometimes I pressed the card between my fingers and asked myself if there had been another path, if I could have reached him before his obsessions grew teeth. But the truth was simpler and crueler. Love does not cure darkness when darkness refuses the light. I didn't stop being his mother when they locked him away. That bond is bone deep, impossible to sever. But I stopped excusing him. I stopped shielding him. In choosing to act, I had saved a life, maybe several, including my own. When I told this to the women at group, one of them reached across the circle and said, "Sometimes the bravest thing a mother can do is step out of denial." Her words settled into me like seed into soil. Now, when I walk past the refrigerator or kneel in my garden, I carry both grief and gratitude. Grief for the son I lost, gratitude for the life that continues. And when people ask what I learned, I tell them this: family can wound as deeply as it loves, but survival is not betrayal. Survival is the beginning of healing. Thank you for listening. If family drama and revenge stories speak to you, don't forget to subscribe and stay with me. There's a new story waiting here every single day.